Welcome back. This is part 2 of my blog post on how to find the best option prices. If you watched part 1 of the video, you saw this graph, the MDM graph that we have in Odds Online, that compares the actual stock price distribution to the normally distributed expectation of the famous Black-Scholes model developed by Nobel Prize winners. It's necessary for me to explain first how we get this data, how we create and build this graph, so that you can understand exactly how we come up with this revolutionary tool. And the next step is calculating and figuring out, based on the actual price distribution instead of the normally distributed expectation, what the fair price is. We want to figure out what the fair price of the option is. The creators of option pricing models have a primary goal. When they build a model, their goal is to determine the fair price of an option. And what I showed you in part 1 of the video is how, like, TrueCar and other companies help you determine the price landscape. In the case of TrueCar, they're showing you the pricing landscape of a used car. They even have the little bell curve on there, and they compare that to the actual data that they gathered on car transactions in your area, so that they can give you accurate pricing landscapes so that you can judge and tell for yourself. Then I showed you how GasBuddy showed you the average price. They just merged all that data together, gave you the average price of gas in your area, and then they showed you exactly where to go get the cheapest gas in your area. The cool thing about this is that the Odds Online software does both of these things. It shows you this graph, with the MDM graph, which shows you the pricing landscape of how the stock price has behaved in the past. You get an idea of how the stock has actually moved and what the pricing landscape looks like compared to the normally distributed expectation, or the bell curve. Then Odds Online, since we have this data, we can do something else. Now, it's a lot more complicated than figuring out the average price of cars in your area or the average price of gas. Calculating the fair price of an option is a lot more complex because of the factors that affect an option's price. Those factors are stock price, strike price, option term or the expiration date, or just time in general, stock volatility, and any other factor that changes the probability that the option will have exercise value at expiration. The creators of Black-Scholes model won the Nobel Prize because they took all these factors and put them together to determine a fair price. Now, there are some unrealistic assumptions, and we talked about it when Fischbach said the model depends on at least 10 unrealistic assumptions. One of those unrealistic assumptions was that the future stock price would be normally distributed. Since Odds Online has the data and it resides on a custom-designed supercomputer, it does not have to make the expectation that the data will be normally distributed. We can determine the stock price's actual distribution and use that data to determine the fair value for every option. We call this Fischbach option value, or FOV for short. This gives Odds Online the ability to do exactly what John Bender described, which is to evaluate every stock and every time frame on an individual basis. We calculate this value for every option on every optionable stock and index ETF. So you can see here an example of this data. This is a straddle ask price, the put and the call at the money options, in this case on Acacia. And you can see that this is the asking price of the straddle, and this is the value of the straddle based on the previous 4 years of data by default in our software. And this is the value ratio right here. So if you take this number divided by this number, the ask price divided by the value, you get the value ratio. The smaller the ratio, the cheaper the options are relative to value. So how well does this method of valuing options work? Now I got to show you this cool graph right here. So what we did is we took every possible straddle in our database, every at-the-money straddle on every optionable asset. We went as far back as we had data for, and we tested on a month-to-month basis and looked at every situation. We took all of the straddles and we grouped them into 10 groups or deciles. So that's why you see this value here that says decile. We broke these up into deciles. Decile 1 are the options that were the cheapest relative to their value, and decile 10 were the options that were the most expensive relative to their value. And what we did then is we just grouped those things together and we got this result. This is the average profit for decile 1 options, decile 1 straddles, and you can see they made the greatest amount of money of any group. And this is decile 10, the most expensive. They lost the most money in that decile compared to any group. And what this tells us, when we have a straight line like this, in academia this is called a monotonic graph. So it's correlated. It tells, this is the graph that we actually really wanted to see. It's monotonic. This is the proof that our method of valuing options works. So now that we've proven that this method of valuing options works, we run our calculations for Fischbach option value on every option in our database, both puts and calls. And you can see here in our Apple option chain, we've got the at-the-money options right here. We show the bid price, the ask price, and you can see right here we show the FOV value. This lets us instantly determine whether an option is expensive or cheap. So this option, we talked about this graph saying that the options yesterday, when we were talking about this MDM graph, we were saying these options looked like they're a little bit expensive. The model is telling us that it should make bigger moves more often than the stock actually has over the past 4 years. And it stayed in this area where the option didn't move much more often than it was supposed to. This graph told us that the options were a little bit expensive. And when we look at the option chain and we look at the calculation for FOV, it shows us the value, exactly what the options should be priced at if they were priced fairly based on the actual price distribution. You can see here that value is 538, and the ask price is a little bit higher than that. Even the bid price is higher than that, showing us that these options are a little bit expensive right now, which is what we expected. So now that we've covered that everything has an FOV and where to get it, this is what lets you easily do like Gas Buddy and just see where can I get the cheapest options. And it's going to vary on every strike price. And you can see that it's going to vary based on everything. Every option has its own value and it's just as John Bender described, based on the time frame, based on the strike price, the different factors that affect an option's price. Every option is going to have its own Fischbach option value, or FOV, and we can quickly spot where we're going to get the best price, because this is the fair price, and we can quickly spot which options on every asset have the best prices. So you can compare the two. So this option up here, the call option at $322.50, is a little bit cheaper than the value. It's 85 cents versus 96. So if I was to buy an option, that might be the one I want to do. So each option is going to be valued differently because supply and demand determines an option's price. And knowing what the value is tells us whether the option is cheap or whether it's expensive. So the next thing that we can do that goes even further than this is this right here. It's called the Ask Value Scan in Odds Online. And what this lets us do is it lets us choose any time period. So I'm going to go out here to February 21. And those deciles I was talking about right here, we do that scan every day. That's exactly how we find the options that are the cheapest are in decile 1. The options that are the most expensive are in decile 10. So if I want to buy options and I want to take advantage of this information, I can instantly find out where are the cheapest options in the market. So when you sort by value, it's going to show you the cheapest options right there at the top. Now anything in decile 1 is going to be cheap relative to the value, but the cheapest one when you sort this isn't always right. So you do got to be careful because sometimes options get cheap for a fundamental reason. If a company is in a merger takeover situation, that could be a factor in why the options are cheap. Something that would not necessarily make us want to buy those options. It doesn't mean that you're automatically going to buy whatever is the cheapest. When we do the scan, you do want to eliminate fundamental reasons for those options being cheap. But you just now have a list of stocks that have options that are cheap relative to everything else in the market, right? These are the cheapest options relative to their value by looking at that value ratio. And if you're an option seller instead of an option buyer, you can click on decile 10 and sort by a value ratio and sort from highest to lowest. These are the most expensive. These are stocks with the most expensive options in the market right now. And for the same reason, you don't want to necessarily just blindly go and buy anything here. You want to eliminate things that are expensive for a fundamental reason, right? But this will get you to those expensive options quickly, fast, super easy. You saw how fast that scan happened. If I want to do this scan for a different date, if I was looking out to March options, I could click on March and I instantly have the list right here, and I know which options are cheap for March. So I know how to get the best deal if I'm buying and if I'm selling. If you're selling, you want to get the most amount of money for your options. And so I know where I'm going to get the best deal is in decile 10. Right there. And that's how Odds Online can quickly and easily improve your option trading like no other. Because there's this tool and this ability is only found in Odds Online. You'll not find it anywhere else. Nobody else has this. I want to thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something really cool that will be very helpful for you. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. I hope you have a good day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.